Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Artist of Data Science Happy Hour number 97. Happy Hour number 97, man. Just 3 away from Happy Hour number 100. If you all tuned in on my live stream yesterday, listen. If you're listening on YouTube, if you're listening to the podcast, go to my YouTube, check out my most recent live stream, which was from yesterday being Thursday, September the 15th. I did an interview with none other than Akira the Don. If you've been listening to any of these podcasts over the last couple of years, 200 some plus episodes, y'all know that Akira the Don has had such a huge positive influence on my life through his music. And it was amazing to be able to sit down and just chat with him. Unique conversation, man. I don't think y'all will hear anything like that on any other data science podcast. So yeah, that's a good one. I'm also doing a bunch of other live episodes coming up, man. I'm getting back into my podcast recording groove. I've got a few people lined up in the very near future. Should I tell you who's going to be coming on the podcast in the near future? All right, I'll tell you. All right, so next Friday, right next Friday at 10 a.m. Central Time, doing a live stream with Ben Taylor. We got none other than Al Bellamy coming on the show. That's on the 3rd of October. The 5th of October, we're doing Megan Liu. Megan Liu's going to be on the show. Then we got Varun Nair. We're going to be talking about Varun's book that he wrote called Breaking Stereotypes. These are all going to be live stream on LinkedIn, live stream on YouTube, and then released later as podcast episodes as I build my back catalog, just because, that's how I do. But yeah, man, I'm excited to get in touch with some other friends of mine, semi-prominent data scientists that you may or may not know on LinkedIn. Be having all of them come through on the Artist of Data Science podcast, because that is what I do. I interview both prominent and semi-prominent data scientists. And also just, a number of authors. There are some great books lined up. For some people I'll be interviewing. One of them is called Restoring Reason. I forgot the author's name. Books about just applying ancient wisdom in a modern context. Another episode I got is a book called Person to Person. And this is a book just about, it's actually just this person-to-person peer economy that is now emerging. And a couple other people. It'll be great conversation. So I'm excited for that, man. I hope y'all are excited. Like, I can't be more happy to get back onto this podcast recording tip, man. It's been so long. It's been like 10 months since I've recorded podcast, and the office is back. The vibes are right, and I couldn't be more happy to get back into it. That being said, my monologue is done, y'all. Shout out to everybody in the room. What's going on? Antonio, good to see you here again, man. It's been so long. Antonio, hope you're doing well. Vin Fascista, what's up? Al Bellamy, Keith McCormick, Gina Duarte, and of course Russell Willis. Everybody chilling out in the room without the camera on. What's going on? So okay, keep your camera off. Shout out to Jason, Faridot, Mikiko, and Sanker. All right, let's get it popping, man. Anybody got anything they want to open the discussion with? Do let me know, man. If there's any questions, any burning questions y'all want to kick off the topic with, do let me know. I had an interesting question that I was asking Akira the Don during the episode of yesterday, right? And he's primarily a creator. He's a music creator, but he does all this stuff through the internet, right? Now it just got me wondering, if the internet was not around, how would your life be different, right? Or, you know what, let's ask another question. How about this? Another thought experiment I was doing was, who would I have become if my social media outlet of choice when I was in my young 20s was something different? For example, Twitter, right? What if I spend most of my time on Twitter versus Instagram or Facebook? Because I only really started messing around with Twitter just a year ago, and my mind was blown as to how much knowledge and wisdom is going on in Twitter. And just the ideas and thoughts I could have been exposed to at a much earlier age, how different life would have been. So I'm curious, man, if, I'm curious to hear what you think your life would be like if you had picked another social media drug of choice when you're in your formative years, or, in the early years of social media. Let's go to Al Bellamy. Let's hear from him. If anybody else wants to jump in, please let me know. If you got questions, please do let me know. I will queue you up. Thank you. Go for Al.
You're gonna go for the old man in the room, man. They invented the internet my freshman year at Ohio U. What are you talking about? Man, I don't know. I mean, especially with social media, certain avenues seem to sort of appeal to our baser instincts. So it's like, yeah, I don't know if I'd had Instagram around early on, that would have been net negative for me. So yeah, probably if I'd had LinkedIn and YouTube around, which, you know, both of which I use for relatively positive things. Yeah, I think I'd be further ahead than I am today. Certainly if I'd started upskilling and started, you know, watching like educational things on YouTube a few years earlier, probably could have upskilled a bit quicker on my way out of the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what's surprising, dude? Like, I didn't even know that websites like, for example, Coursera or Udemy or Udacity, like these type of course, like, you know, websites that have all this knowledge and wisdom. I didn't even know this is a thing until I was in my mid-30s. And I was like, I've been reading textbooks the entire time, getting like getting bored as fuck. But yeah, that's a trip, man. Let's hear from Antonio, and if anybody else wants to jump in, do let me know. If no, you know, if you guys want to chime in on this question, I'd love to hear what you guys say. Just simply use the hand raise icon. A lack of hand raises will mean that I'll move on to the question that we got from Gina. Gina's got a question about pre-trained models. But Antonio, let's hear from you.
I mean, a couple things come to my mind. I think if I went on Twitter other than LinkedIn, I think the writing style would have been a lot different. I go on Twitter and I see all of these like what is it called? Is it called copyright or something? Is all this concise stuff. So when I went from LinkedIn to Twitter and I have like I don't know, I mean, even LinkedIn is short format, but not as short as Twitter, obviously. So trying to turn everything into a thread has been like pretty difficult. I'm like, come on, I just need like 3 more words. I don't want to start another tweet, you know, right now. So it's kind of, and I think it's very useful for people who are like the Justin Welshes of the world, who are pitching ideas and trying to earn money with being a creator. I think that's a very valuable skill set that I'm missing.
Yeah.
That's like the one thing that came to my mind. I think the second thing was from a very young age. I was probably 10 years old. I posted like videos on YouTube. I was doing statistics comparing different creators, but I didn't even know back then that you could actually like make money off of this. I had posted about 10 videos and it was like comparing these different people, and then, you know, people I remember somebody commented on my thing like, "Oh, well your like numbers might be wrong, or you're not getting it." You know how people always like to shit on other people's work. So I kind of like backed away from that channel. I mean, it was probably too young for it. But I think if I knew that you could actually make money and where it would be today, I would have definitely kept going. I think that's the one thing that I would change. I probably wouldn't be anything crazy right now, but it definitely would have a lot more followers on YouTube, and especially because I love that channel, like for learning, like you guys are saying.
Yeah. Antonio, thank you. Russell got a valid comment here saying maybe it wasn't a thing until your mid-30s, talking about those online education courses and stuff. I think you're probably right. That this also has something to do with it. But let's hear from Gina. Then from Gina, we'll go to Keith. If anybody else wants to jump in on this topic, let me know. Or if anybody has a question, whether you're here in the Zoom room, whether you are watching live on LinkedIn, I welcome, or YouTube, I welcome all of your questions, your comments, your concerns, all of them. Go for Gina.
Yeah, so 2 comments on this topic. I, for one, am very glad social media was not around when I was young in high school, even younger. I think there's too much pressure from it. And of course, especially I think for women, there's so much pressure. I mean, it's bad enough with the fashion magazines. You felt like you had to look a certain way. And it was heartening to hear guys, at least some guys, say, I don't necessarily want to be with a super skinny girl, but you know, that's what we were that was the message. And I think now with all of these social media platforms, there's just so much, I think, psychological risk for young people. And at the same time, if they can learn to navigate it successfully, I think as we see, especially, well, millennials and especially Gen Zs coming of age, they seem to have a certain ease with it that a lot of older people don't. Yeah, the other thing is, though, somebody mentioned brevity and just putting ideas out there. And the one thing that coming of age when the internet wasn't a thing, shall we say, is that there was a time when if you were going to publish something, there were a lot of gatekeepers and you just couldn't publish wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted. You couldn't just say whatever you wanted to say. And because there were gatekeepers, stuff had to be of a certain quality. There was also a feeling, and I think, Antonio, you kind of referred to this a little bit in YouTube, right? Like, if you just put something out there, it might be great, but you're going to be subject to a lot of criticism. And at the same time, if you do put something out there that's really good in the current environment, it's difficult to, necessarily rise above the noise. So the downside of that, for those of us who grew up in that era, is that we can feel quite hesitant to start putting stuff out on social media. So I think certainly those who've grown up with it have an advantage. And I see Costa had just joined, and I know he, on a data science happy hour, I don't know, some months ago, maybe had some thoughts on the challenges of a younger person, particularly coming of age with Facebook chats and disagreements and all the rest.
Gina, thanks so much. Let's go to Keith. Thank you very much, Keith. By the way, if you guys got questions, comments, whatever, please do let me know. Monitoring the chat on all platforms. Go for it, Keith.
Yeah, I'm one of the older folks here, too. So I just looked it up. If I'm not mistaken, internet was 1991, right? Is that the agreed upon birth of the internet year, give or take? That was undergrad graduation year for me. So this was definitely not, something during my formative years. So I just want to comment a little bit on how I ended up being fairly active on LinkedIn. I've been blogging for a while, but I never blogged that consistently. So I would use Twitter to say, hey, I just wrote a blog post. Because, this is back when they had the character limit. So you couldn't say much more than that. But the thing about Twitter is I never found myself consuming it that much, because it would alert you to the fact that there was a link to an article, but no one was kind of sharing their 2 cents. There wasn't so much room for people to do that, other than saying, hey, this is great, check it out, So I started using LinkedIn, I think mostly because the LinkedIn learning connection. So naturally, it just felt very natural to say, hey, here's something I did or whatever. But the reason I think I'm on LinkedIn almost every day is because I like consuming it. There's just a lot of good stuff on there. If I spend 30 or 45 minutes on LinkedIn, part of me wants to say, oh gosh, I got to get started with my day. But I usually don't look back on that half hour or more and feel that it was time wasted, So I think it's because I'm constantly consuming stuff that I feel that that's the place that I want to be. That's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you very much, Keith. I'm curious, man. So let's go to Vin. Vin, what back when social media first popped off? I mean, I know for us back then it was like Friendster, MySpace, things like that. But what was your social media kind of drug of choice, and how do you think your life would be different if you chose a different social media?
I think I had the weirdest path into social media because I started on social media to do professional stuff. Like I didn't do the social part of it. I got on Twitter originally to just start doing, talking about data science, talking about analytics and big data and all of that, because there were a whole bunch of creators on there. I mean, we weren't creators back then. We were called many things, and not all of them were nice. So we were all on there talking about big data and trying to get in front of all of the just BS that was out there. And that's kind of what jumped me onto Twitter, was being able to refute some of the garbage that was out there. And so I got really used to, all I need is this short 128 character, and then here's an article underneath it. And that's really what it was. It was sharing other people's content and adding just a little bit of a blurb to, here's what you needed to know. Here's like a little bit of context that you needed. And that was my relationship. That was the first relationship I had with social media, was using it professionally. and then started looking at it as a personal connection tool. I tried Facebook and I just went, this is dumb. I don't want this. I didn't want anything to do with it. But now I have so many personal connections, like friends that I know. And the only way we would have ever met was with social media. So I went backwards. I still don't have a Facebook account, but I use Twitter. Like I actually have friends on Twitter. I have a couple of alt accounts so I can be myself and be human. And, I got introduced to Reddit 4 years ago. I think Reddit's awesome. I think that's the future of social media. When you look at things like Reddit, I think there's going to be some sort of an evolution of Reddit to something that's more, I don't know, not tame, but I mean more structured than Reddit is right now. And I think that's where we go with social media, because it's so much richer. The communities are so much deeper. The connections that are made are so much better. And I think that's the cool thing about where social media is going now, is we literally went to the absolute worst place possible on social media, and people realized they didn't like it for the most part. And then now we're going and figuring out what's good social media, what's healthy social media, which is kind of interesting, because when we first had the internet, everyone was talking about this thing that was going to connect people. And it wasn't until MySpace showed up, and then Facebook, and then FARC. I'm old. FARC was a website that was like a message board, free form message board, troll of all, like Redditors. The old Redditors all started there. That's where they learned how to be Redditors, is on FARC and on other types of web message boards like that. And I think we've finally gotten to the point where we understand how to use it to connect each other. And we're not just using it to advertise to each other, and we're not talking at each other. So I think that's where we're going. And it's really interesting, from a career standpoint. I don't think anyone's career will be the same in 2 to 3 years as the type of career that I had before social media came out. I don't think it's possible anymore.
Yeah, I'd like to see more just niche communities where people who are just interested, like if you think about 10,000, 50,000 people, like that sounds like a lot of people, but that's such a small fraction of humanity. But if you get like 10, 50,000 people together, all interested in a small topic, imagine the wonderful conversations and just joy they'll be able to bring into their lives from that. So we got a couple of hands raised up. We got a queued up question from Gina that we'll get to. Keith, there's a question waiting for you on LinkedIn that I want you to start noodling about. Also, man, like if anybody has any insight to share about the Ethereum merge, I would love to hear about that. If anybody has any insight, please do let me know. But let's go in the order of hands raised. We'll go to Serge, then Mark, then Kostub. Then we'll hit Gina's question. Then we'll hit the question from Reem Ayubi that she has for Keith. And then we'll, hopefully somebody can enlighten me on what the hell the Ethereum merge is all about. Go for it, Serge.
Hi. Yeah. My social media is also history is I've always been late adopter to like the major sites you see today. Even if I joined early, I didn't become active till later in each one of them because I'm kind of apathetic to the idea. And strangely enough, LinkedIn, I opened my account like, I don't know, like 12 years ago or something like that, a long time ago. But I didn't become really active on it till like 4 years ago. So it's just one of those cases. But LinkedIn is actually the closest, I think, to what my best kind of engagement with social kind of sites are. Because early on, if you wanted to do social media kind of things, you had chat rooms, you had forums, and you had other kinds of sites like that. I fail to remember, but there were just a ton of sites where you could engage with people that form part of a community. And blogs as well. You do comment on blogs. So it was like really disconnected. It wasn't all in one place. And actually, I built a social media site back then. Before it was kind of a term. It had a lot of the precursor stuff that you would expect from a social media site. It was for electronic music events. And the thing is, whenever social media sites as they exist today were created, like general purpose things that were not about communities, but about connecting, like, high school classmates and, like, your parents, and their family, your families and everything, and the entire community. That kind of sucked because, like, to me, like, the discussions that I would have in forums, those are like kind of discussions I would have, with, classmates from high school and, my cousins. It's just not necessarily the case, but like LinkedIn is like the closest I've seen in social media sites to that kind of discussions I would have back in the day. And that's why I've come to like it.
Yeah. It is I can literally attribute everything good that has happened in my life in the last 4 years to LinkedIn. The time that I put into the platform, like I've literally four to 5x my salary since 2018. I've met so many cool people, started podcasts, doing all this crazy stuff. I wouldn't have been able to do it if it wasn't for this platform. Thank you, Serge. By the way, I remember like this one forum that I was a part of. I think this was back in 2008, 2007, 2008, when maybe 2009, when I was like studying being an actuary. It was called the Actuarial Outpost, and that's where I used to hang out whenever I get stuck on practice problems. Would be working through it async. That was a cool experience. Serge, thank you very much. Let's go to Mark. Let's go to CoStub. Then after Mark and CoStub, we're gonna go to Gina for her question on a pre-trained model. Then after Gina's question on the pre-trained model, we're gonna go to Reem's question that she has for Keith. That's talking about PLS-SEM compared with covariance-based SEM and Bayesian networks. That sounds like a dope-ass causal inference type of conversation. So I'm here for it. Mark, go for it.
What's up? So I think the question was like, what was the first kind of social media kind of got onto? For me, it was MySpace. Who are your top 5 friends? Very important decisions to signal out to your network at that time. And then Facebook became the main thing kind of for me in high school and early college. But one thing I think hasn't come down in this conversation yet, and I feel like I completely missed out on, and I wish I did more, was gaming, like online gaming, like people playing Call of Duty or Halo or those different things. The amount of close ties and like very close relationships people made during that, I like completely missed out on because I was just like too socially anxious to like talk to people online like that. And so, but I remember like on Reddit, I hear people talk about like, yeah, I played this game for 5 years straight every single day, and we finally met in person and like best of friends, right? And so I think there's like something really special to that, where even though it's not this mass reach, kind of like Facebook, showing up and meeting people from across the world and doing a shared task that's like really fun to do, there's something really powerful in that. And I think that's something like we might take for granted, like how crazy that is, that like we had a time span even now where you can literally link up with anyone in the world and play games and form these deep relationships, and not even see their face. It's just a character and listening to them in your headphones and maybe cussing at them. And so I think that's something really cool that I completely missed out on, that I wish I got more into. I guess I could get into it now, but I just don't play video games enough. But I think it's so cool. Maybe Carly might be a great person to talk to about that, because she's a Call of Duty.
Yeah, that was one of the first games where I started playing and building community like you're describing. Again, this was back probably 2009, 10. The original Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. We had like clans. Have like this clan, and then I remember once I had a clan that was the same name as another clan. Then I had to go battle a leader to claim ownership of the clan. Actual tag. It was wild, man. Back in the days. Mark, thank you so much. Let's go to CoStub.
All right, let me cap this off with the most cynical thing I have ever said on one of your podcasts.
See, you also
so
said that last week.
Wild. I know. I'm just going to pile it on. And I'm going to top myself each time, right? So Oscar Wilde, man has least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth. The fact is, social media is society's mask, right? That's why you've got anonymity. That's why you've got Reddit as how Reddit is, right? We're slowly lifting that mask because we're connecting everything together. we're connecting different platforms together, the same login in 10 different places now. So you can kind of start to lift the mask if you look deep enough, but yeah, still got the opportunities for a master.
Kosep, thank you so much. All right, let's go to a great discussion, y'all. Thank you so much. I just love how the conversation questions morph up one answer, and it's just one question and answer trails and stuff. It's amazing. Thank you all. Let's go to Gina's question. Gina had a question about pre-trained models for a particular use case that she has. Gina, go for it.
Thanks. Yeah, so I am working actually with a nonprofit coding organization, and we are using the starting off with the TACO data set, so trash annotations in context, and the idea is to use computer vision models to help identify trash in images. And some of you may have heard of Literati, and I believe that's some of what they do, but this use case is completely open source, giving people the ability to upload batches of photos. I can tell you, I can put it in the chat, Trash AI, you can go check it out if you would like. I think it's trashai.org. I see something in the chat from Miko. OnlyFans account. Okay, that's I won't go into that there. Anyway, so through a chain of events, so this group kind of came to this project trying to solve this problem of how do we identify what trash is reported by just users, people, general public, and where it's located. Here in California, Caltrans, one of the sponsors of this is his day job is with Caltrans and has to do with, there's a lot of money now, thank goodness, being allocated towards beautification projects in California. Especially during the pandemic, it seems like litter and trash just got so much worse. And already in their first year, right, they've collected over 1 million cubic yards of trash across the state. And I don't know if that's over and above what they typically do, but in any case, a tool like this, like Trash AI or something similar, could be very useful for municipalities, for community organizations, anybody who's interested in identifying where trash is located and litter hotspots and all the rest. Now, in their efforts to kind of get this thing kicked off, they found on Kaggle that I think there was a challenge at one point, and so some people had used YOLO v5 as a pre-trained model and they used the TACO data set to train the model and come up with various annotations. And what we're finding is that the accuracy isn't great, even if you run it on lots and lots of epochs. I should also add the TACO data set. I think it's a total of 3,000 images. I'm not 100% sure. It might only be 1,500. So it's not lots. So another down the road use case is to allow users to upload photos, annotate them, et cetera, et cetera. So with that preamble, my question is, and think about what a photo with litter might be. It might be, the height of a person taking the photo, 5 feet up or whatever that is, and the litter is pretty prominent in there. Or it could be a shot, where litter is 10 to 20 feet off in the distance. One eventually could imagine aerial photos. So then in those cases, the litter would be a much smaller, portion of a photo. And so I'm looking for any advice people have of other pre-trained models, or even YOLO v5, I think, is it Roblox? I can't remember who they're working with to improve upon YOLO v5 or as some sort of an additional tool to use with it. And so I see Kostab's put something in the comments there, but I guess more broadly, I don't know if certain models that are out there, like ResNet or what's the other one now? I'm forgetting one of the other big name models. If those are general purpose, even for something like this, or are there particular models or approaches that people would recommend for this particular type of problem?
Let's go to Costa, resident computer vision expert, and then Serge, if you're around, if you want to chime in on this, I'd be happy to hear from you. Anybody else who's got experience with computer vision, please do feel free to just raise your hand to come into the queue. Costa, go for it if you're still here. Yes, you are.
Yeah, I am. So today's been total deer in headlights day for me. Cool. So yeah, so I guess you've got 3,000 images, you got a variety of representations of what you're looking for, right? The first thing really that I look at is how do I go about, and it's a bit harder with images, right? Is how do I go about categorizing what kind of images do I have? You said distance is one of the things, like scale is one of the things. Can I get some idea of how big, what's the distribution of tiny things off in the distance versus big things up close, right? Understanding that is going to help you try to improve the data set either through augmentation or through whatever other means, right? So how can you understand that first? Understand the nature of what's in the data set, what's not in the data set that you might be missing. And then are there ways that you can augment and improve your data set so that you can like cover for that? You might only have a few examples of things off in the distance that are clear, right? Or what if all the trash in that system is, you know, you've only got 3,000 pictures. I can't imagine that's a huge deal of variety unless you're literally pointing to a garbage dump, right? So yeah, it's really about how can you take what you have and improve that data set to, you know, maybe synthetically cut and paste, cut mix, all sorts of different approaches in computer vision, right? See if you can build up data sets that are somewhat realistic to make that a bit bigger, or a bit more balanced in terms of the situations you're going to see at least. That's the starting point, I guess. You've got a number of different models that you can try,
ahead,
but really, I mean, whether you're talking Detectron, whether you're talking ResNet, whether you're talking YOLO V5 or any of the YOLO family or any of the YOLO, we are not actually part of the family YOLO models.
I do not know of these.
So there's YOLO, there's YOLO, which is the Joe Redmond one, right? And YOLO V2 is also part of the family. I think YOLO V3 was the first Ultralytics one, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah, I think it was.
Is that right? Yeah. And then YOLO V4 was then part of the original family again. And then YOLO V5 is kind of probably one of the better performing ones out of the whole lot. But that's again Ultralytics, and it's really easy to serve. It's really easy to pull down from Torch Hub. They made the usability for that extremely good. There's now V6 and V7 that have come from totally different people and don't necessarily actually use the same structure as YOLO, so they might perform differently. There's plenty that you could do to experiment with different models, but really start with your data set, start with exploring how you can make that more representative of what you're likely to see in the real world, right? The other side of it is essentially what can you do in terms of learning features from pre-trained models, right? Can you pre-train instead of training a model from scratch? Obviously, if you get something that's been pre-trained on the whole ImageNet, you know, data set, that at least gives you some idea of a baseline of general objects, gives you baseline of general weights. Where do you start to retrain? Where do you start to retrain from? Do you just retrain the whole thing on top of it? Or are you saying, okay, I'm going to freeze the weights at this layer and then continue to retrain up to a particular layer? There's experimentation that you can do with that, and that will improve or make your performance worse. The other thing you can do is if you find that it's, I mean, this comes to experimentation, but if you find that up to a certain layer is really good at developing the features that you need, but then after that it starts, you know, looking at too many cats and dogs, then maybe you can essentially retrain entirely from that layer onwards. So there's a bunch of different approaches you can use. Depends how long you have, depends how how much money you have for GPU compute, and depends on really how accurate do you need it to be, right? Remember that the nature of trash is transient. So really, as long as you can tell someone that, hey, there is some trash within this, 10-foot radius over here, you could quite literally turn around and say, hey, go send someone or something, a robot, to go pick it up, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be a detector. The other option is a trash or no trash classifier, right? What if you do something like that? The trick is you need to get your patch sizes of that image small enough that you're not worrying about overfitting to things like, oh, there's sidewalk, because a lot of trash is next to sidewalk, right? So there's considerations like that in the real world that you got to think of. But maybe that's an alternate approach. Is like my question is trash detection at a distance actually useful to anyone at all? Right. It just becomes a fundamental question. What are you trying to do with it? Right. In my mind, either you're saying at a distance, hey, in this 10-foot radius, there is some trash here. Someone go deal with it. That would be my first thing, is saying, hey, there is trash, there's no trash. Then you send a robot along that gets up close and personal, gets into that 10-foot radius and starts scanning the area. Then you're within 5 feet, 4 feet, and you're basically looking at, how do I detect it? And at that point, your perspective is no longer top down. It's going to be front on for two reasons. One, you need to be close to the ground anyway to pick up the trash. Drones are unstable closer to the ground, so you're probably not going to be wanting to use a drone for that anyway. Second thing is, drones have really, really powerful rotors. So even if you did get a drone to come down and try and pick the trash up, 90% of the time, the trash is going to get blown away because you got rotors, right? So from a practicality standpoint, you're probably sending something on wheels, right? So you can assume that the perspective shift is going to happen. So I don't know, I would approach the problem a little bit differently. But I guess that doesn't really answer your question in terms of learning about this data set and all that. But yeah.
Well, no, that's really helpful. So there are several suggestions, and I might have to listen to the podcast again to capture all of them. And also Mikiko put in the comments about data augmentation. Yes, absolutely. And I think, I'm fairly new to this group. It's all volunteers. I don't think there's much budget to speak of. And up until recently, I think primarily they've had coders, and one coder has just done an amazing job of doing the front end and back end to get the thing so that it can upload batch photos, and basically he does it with browser caching, and so they are managing to do very well, not burdening the AWS, I guess, S3 bucket. So that's fantastic.
Can I just
Sure.
ask you, is this in the context of like a personal project, or is this in the context of a work project that you're trying to work on?
Yeah, it's a work project, but I'm a volunteer with this group, but I just think it's really awesome. Yeah, so so imagine one use case is Caltrans, so a Department of Transportation or municipality or county, trying to identify where is their trash, what kind of trash is it. So A, they can go out and pick it up more efficiently, and B, they can identify what is that content, and so how might they target, let's say, public education programs and the like. So to your point, while you may possibly have drones potentially going over rights of way, taking images, it would be picked up in probably, as far as the bulk of the benefit, by the highway crews and the like. But you could also imagine, in fact, there's the group sponsoring it, and I don't know if they're actually giving a certain amount of funds or just brought it to the group to work on, but they're seeking to reduce plastic pollution. And so it wouldn't only be a potential use case for, let's say, Caltrans. So that's just a bit of an overview.
Go for it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Look, and there's another complication there, is that drones within areas near transportation and things like that is quite difficult from a legal perspective, right? So it's quite unlikely that you'd be using that anyway. You're probably looking at traffic cameras. You're probably looking at cameras on other, mobile equipment that already exists within the system, on trains and things like that. Purely because you can't fly that close to, infrastructure and people, right? Actually, I don't know what the laws are in USA, but that's what it's like in Australia, right? Pretty sure most countries just copied CASA's laws anyway, so Australia was ahead. So in this, like everything Mikiko's saying in the chat is just so solid in terms of like creating synthetic data, data augmentation, and things like that, right? That is the cheaper way of bulking up your data set fast, as opposed to annotating new images, because that means having to collect new images in the first place. Very, very expensive way to do this. Annotations can cost you, both from a platform, like how much you're paying for an annotation platform, as well as finding cheap labelers and finding good labelers that actually honestly get it done the way you do it. So yeah, I think Mikiko's got some great ideas in there. I think I want to hear from her actually.
Mikiko, if you are there, do shout out. I'm also curious. This is actually a question that was asked. Did an AMA session last week with might have been 2 weeks ago, I can't remember, but it was with some of the experts over at DESI, and then Matt McFarlane, who was asking a question in there. I thought it was an interesting question. He's asking about the use of like things like stable diffusion to generate training data. Would that work? What would that be like? Instead of getting real synthetic data, we could type in a prompt and generate variations of the type of data that we want. I thought that was an interesting question. But Mikiko, if you're yes, there you are. Go for it. You got some good comments. Talk to us about your comments.
Yeah, I guess I was just saying that in terms of like so like Andrew Ng, he had this talk like 2 years ago about like data-centric AI versus like model-centric AI. And I thought it was interesting because a lot of times like our first sort of and it's not like a wrong intuition necessarily, but our first like I think steps as data scientists or ML engineers a lot of times is change the model architecture. Well, it's like do feature engineering and then change the model architecture. But his talk was kind of like getting at the fact that like a lot of times there's just things you can do to like additionally add to your data set that will like get you far greater returns as opposed to changing like the model architecture itself. So like the two suggestions that like I've been given when working with computer vision projects is one, try to do like data augmentation. So for example, if you have like images of like objects or items, like try to deform them in some way or change, like rotate them, change the shape, all that good stuff. So like from a single image that's already like, annotated and all that, you could potentially get like 10 like images out of there. Maybe even do like a dirty filter on it where it's like, like little Instagram yellow snapshot vignette style or what have you. So there's a lot of things ways you can kind of add there. Another option is using like weak labeling. There's like a tool, Snorkel AI is very famous for that. There's other ones too. And then another option is also to either scour, connect with like companies, for example, like Unsplash. So whenever you like look for an image to add to your Medium article or what have you, most of those images, they would have actually already had the meta tags in there. So there are also companies that offer those sort of services where if they provide you with the metadata tag, that could be another way. And then another option as well is honestly, Kaggle is great. Like people are constantly putting up their own like data sets. Like the ones I've used for some fashion recommender projects, like they have like 5 or 6 of them where it's like thousands of images each. So you can find ways to like find data sets of like other objects that you could then sort of like co-opt to add there. So I would, like I would explore those options because if you think about it with like a model architecture, you could almost just do like a very quick swap and swap out, and you'll see that like more like other model architectures, they might only get you an incremental like 1-2% lift, and that might not be good enough, right, for the KPI for how the model operates. So those are just like some suggestions. I always like not spending or giving money to AWS or any of the cloud vendors, so I'd be cheap like that. But yeah, I would try those out.
Mikiko, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let's move on to the question. Hopefully, Gina, that was some good answers there. Let's move on to the question from Reem. I see Reem joined us from LinkedIn. She had a question for Keith, and I'm sure Vin might be interested in this question too, given you both you guys are interested in causal inference. Reem, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. You have a question. That was a good question. I'd love to hear more about it. Go for it.
Sure. I'd like to give you a little background. So I'm switching from academia to industry and trying to see where I fit. And so I've been taking Keith's courses to understand the language and how things translate. And so that's been super interesting, great courses. And I started to wonder how some tools that I use relate to Keith's material that he's teaching, because we use statistics, but machine learning has a slightly different set of vocabulary, and where is it the same, where is it different? And so let's see. So for my dissertation, and also before that, I've been using structural equation modeling using Smart PLS is the tool, but the approach is partial least squares. So the reason I went with that is because of modeling the latent variables as formative, and in other fields, a formative variable is called causal, sometimes index, maybe. But with the index, I think everything gets thrown in there, whereas when it's a formative construct, you see each one of the indicators separately, modeled separately. So anyways, I'm trying to figure out, is it considered good enough to understand, to call it causal inference in the sense of Judea Pearl's approach. But then, I discovered the Bayesian networks, and I think that's a super interesting approach to try as well with the data. So basically, my question is, how is it related? Is it used? Have you seen it used in industry? And can one call it causal inference? Am I summarizing things well enough?
Well, there's a number of interesting issues. So I think let me see if I'm clear on the big picture. One of the big picture questions is, as you shift from academia to industry, would those two tribes, so to speak, have somewhat different preferences, perhaps, in what they find persuasive? I think that's also kind of in your question, right? And then I think I think you also have a more specific question about, given a particular project that you're working on now, which one possibly is the better fit to the problem, right. SEM or Bayesian, right?
Yeah.
So let me see if I can't give the best background context in about 45 seconds or a minute here. So the course that Reem is talking about, and of course, thanks for checking out the course, started as what it was originally going to be. I've always been intrigued with some software called Bayesian Lab, which is software for doing Bayesian networks. So I said, well, I'm going to try to figure out how to put a course together. And part of it was, and a lot of us as content producers have done this. It's like, okay, if I draw a line in the sand and I put in my calendar that I'm going to teach how to use the software, I've got to get up to speed on it too, right? So we've all done that. So that was part of the motivation. So then I sat down to say, okay, what would people need to know before they really get Bayesian networks? And what would they need to know that? And what would they need to know? What would be the prerequisite to that? And working my way back. Well, the list was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. So it ended up becoming like a 2-part course. The next thing you know, the course that you found, Reem, is basically a 5-hour prerequisite list of prerequisite topics to get people ready for Bayesian networks, right? So given that, the basic class of problems we're talking about is a way to systematically say something like A predicts B predicts C, and hopefully in a way that you could convince somebody there's some causality going on. So in terms of the two tribes question, I would say that for the academic audience, probably SEM is going to be the more persuasive, because, you know, academics love their p-values, you know, so you're going to have goodness of fit tests and things like that are just more consistent with what they're used to. Now, I will say up front here, claim some ignorance on the difference between partial least squares SEM in this context and regular SEM. You know, I'm familiar with partial least squares and I'm familiar with SEM, but doing PLS SEM is something I haven't tried, right? So, but I don't think we have to go down that rabbit hole, you know, to address the question in terms of which would be more persuasive. I think for academics, probably the SEM would be more so. The other thing that I would say is, from the brief description that I saw, it seems like you have latent variables. And of course, by latent variables, we mean something that you're not measuring directly. So you might ask somebody 5 questions, and you'll know this, Reem, but to help everybody understand the context here if they're not familiar with it, you might ask a battery of questions that are trying to get anxiety, you know, and you might say something like, if someone's experiencing anxiety at work, are they more likely to have more turnover? Are they more likely to leave that job and go to another job or something like that, right? So in the SEM model, you have this variable anxiety, but it's not measured directly. It's measured indirectly by the battery of questions. So it's kind of like factor analysis and regression in a blender, right? So that's what's going on with SEM. But again, it has a lot of these elements that academics like. On the Bayesian network side, I think what's interesting about that option is, I think in industry, I think a number of you would probably agree, Bayesian's kind of, you know, hot right now. And I think it would be hot in some academic circles too, but it's increasingly embraced. I think it's going through kind of a renaissance. And the other thing I would say about that is that Judea Pearl is big on this idea of counterfactuals. What if you made a different decision? One of the example I have in the course is that you probably recall is, what if we didn't buy the Super Bowl ad? What would our revenue have been if we didn't buy the Super Bowl, you know, ad, right? That's a really nice trick, which I think is persuasive to what management wants to see. Because they're all about making the, should we have chosen A or should we have chosen B? Give me a sense of what what the road not taken would have been. I think the road not taken argument is more persuasive to management in an industrial setting, in an industry setting, than p-values would be, especially when it's the weird p-values you see in SEM, which are, you know, you want it to be above 0.05, because if it's below 0.05, you reject the null hypothesis that it, you know, that it fits, and the whole craziness of that, you know. So my initial reaction would be is that because you have latent variables, I think going with SEM was probably the right thing to do. And since you were in an academic setting at the time, I doubly think that it was the right thing to do. I don't know whether or not you have a scenario that could work with a counterfactual. But if you did, that's why I would be intrigued to see what Bayesian networks might be able to do for you, is if you could articulate a counterfactual that you thought was interesting. But the latent traits make me think you were better off in SEM. And just one final comment. The reason that these two seem to be in this cage match at the end of the course is that at the end of all this time of meeting all these prerequisites, there was only so much time. So I figured, well, what are the ones that I can explain in a relatively briefly that would seem like 2 interesting options that people might want to pursue further. So I did a very basic SEM example on a, you know, in a very basic Bayesian network. I mean, these are very short examples, but some others, Reem, have commented that they enjoyed the course, but they said, wow, I hope you weren't trying to imply that these were the only 2 choices, you know, and they're not, of course, right? There's a bunch. So, but I would love to hear what others have to say about all of that.
Keith, I got to make time to go through that course of yours, at least skim through it, come up with some questions. And once I do, definitely we're going to have a deeper podcast episode conversation on that. Vin, any insights here? I know this is something that you're big on, or Reem, any follow-up questions or anything?
Yeah, I would mention that with PLS SEM, the p-value thing is like normal. If you get a p-value below 0.05, it is a good fit. And so it works differently from the kind of, it's called covariance-based. So that's how we distinguish between the two. Covariance-based SEM is the one you mentioned in your course. And it has a lot more restrictions and assumptions that should be respected than PLS SEM. PLS SEM is good with small size samples, not that small, but it doesn't require a huge sample size. And it's very forgiving in terms of assumptions, normality, and that kind of thing. And it allows a different way of modeling these latent constructs. So it's pretty practical in that sense.
You reminded me, another question I think was, would folks be convinced of causality from PLS SEM as opposed to regular covariance-based SEM?
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of any reason that somebody that's comfortable with SEM would be persuaded by covariance-based SEM and not PLS SEM. And I feel comfortable saying that, even though I haven't played around with PLS SEM, right? However, there are some folks that just in general don't think you can prove causality with anything, and if you're an SEM fan and you run into that kind of critique, that someone says that you're going beyond what your data supports because they seem to be making this you can never prove causality argument, then I really like the article that Judea Pearl wrote with Ken Boland, if I'm remembering right. It's called something like 7 Myths about Causality and SEM or something like that. I said it in the course, but that would be one that I would, if anyone's familiar with those two topics, I think you would enjoy that article. It's basically saying what kind of critiques do people make about SEM in general and how they would answer those critiques. So again, it's some kind of 7, I think it's 7 myths, could be 8 myths, but it's myths about SEM and causality by Pearl and Boland.
I'm looking forward to reading that article. Just downloaded it. Harpreet, do I have another minute to say something about causality?
Yes, absolutely. And Vin's also into this stuff too. So Vin, if you want to chime in, jump on the discussion, do let me know, and go for it, Rim. Okay, great. So if we want to prove causality, there are a few things that you went over at the beginning of the course, Keith. One is randomness. Another is the time sequence of events, right? And then another is, help me out if I'm blanking out a bit here. So the experimental design. So that's a factorial design, for example, which comes from experimentation and so on. So you can set these things up with the research design to get at causality with SEM. So depending on when you collect your data, how you collect your data, when you put your interventions into the process, all of these things can come together to develop a causal model. It's like you said, not just the data speaking for itself, but the whole logic and the design behind the research study or the analysis that we're doing. It all comes together to create a causal argument. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for inviting me to come on and have this discussion. I really appreciate it. My research was on social media, by the way.
and the
Nice.
impact of social media on well-being. So we
Ah.
could always explore that at some time if you
Could
like.
you give everybody one example of a latent trait in your research, just so that they can kind of picture?
Sure. Well, I can give you a couple very briefly. So, for example, perceived usefulness of a software. My research was about social media. I asked about Facebook specifically, and it had nothing to do with the company Facebook. So, do you find Facebook useful? And there's a validated measure that measures perceived usefulness from the technology acceptance model. And then one that I developed myself for the study, I had to, was perceived Facebook functionality. So what do people perceive as a functionality of Facebook? And so I had to do a whole qualitative portion of the study based on literature and then interviews, and developed items for that. And I had many items that split into different dimensions. And so, for example, I can make friends on Facebook, and it would be on a Likert scale. I agree to I disagree. I can meet someone I've never met before on Facebook. Again, Likert scale, I agree to I disagree, that kind of thing. So all of those can be factor analyzed, grouped into latent traits or latent variables, and then put into the structural equation model that way. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of a flavor how you might have multiple survey items that together are, one latent trait.
Yeah. And we would have an idea of what sort of factor structure it will sort into, but the factor analysis, the exploratory phase, would put them into those factors using a machine learning algorithm. And then the second part of the study with a new sample would confirm whether that factor structure stays or if it's not valid, and we go back to the drawing board.
Thank you very much, Reem. Vin, any insight or comments here? I know this is something that Vin writes heavily about on his newsletter. So Reem, if you're interested in more, definitely check out Vin's newsletter.
I would love to.
I would just say,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say I would love to hear more comments on it. I'd really enjoy that.
Yeah, I think because Keith pretty much covered more than I know completely about causal, about the question that you asked. But what's interesting about causal is no matter what you say, no matter what answer someone would give to your question, someone else would disagree. And you could have a complete discussion where both people could very easily support themselves being right, which is where we are in causal right now, especially when you talk about combining it with machine learning approaches. We're not in a place where we have certainty. We're in a place where a question like yours is almost philosophical in some cases, because like I said, when I see Judea Pearl arguing with, multiple other people that are smarter than I'll ever be, and they are both making legitimate points, and they're both, that's the place that we're at. And the reason why I wanted to throw in a comment is because when you get into the business setting, no one in machine learning really has a strong grasp on the data science connection to causal. It's something that's being worked out. You have companies that are finally publishing frameworks, like Microsoft and Amazon have great frameworks that they've just recently published, the DoI framework, or it's got a new name now, PyY. Sorry, not DoI, PyY, where they're collaborating on it together. And Amazon came at it from one completely different direction than Microsoft came at it, but they are complementary to each other. And you could see from their work, and if you go to Microsoft's website on PyY, it's worth reading, because you'll hear Amazon and Microsoft's approaches contrasting each other as far as the original need. And I think that's what's important to read there. It's probably not going to be a whole lot of information for you, but you're going to hear Amazon needed diagnostics. Amazon needed that diagnostic causal portion of it to figure out what was going on with something as complex as AWS. You know, if we make this change, what would the implications be? That's kind of important, but for them, it's more something slowing down. Why? What went wrong? And so they were looking at it as a diagnostic use case. And then they would provide that information to smart people, engineers who could solve the problem. And then the engineers would pass their solution back to the model. And the model would say, yes, you probably will solve this problem, or no, we don't, you know, there may be other issues. And you can see what they're doing is they've got a smart person who can make that decision, who can figure out what the fix should be. But the complexity is really what went wrong and what am I going to do, or what am I going to do to the system when I introduce the fix? And so I think those are the things that are going to be interesting for you since you're making the transition in, because in academia, you're really asked to do something so much more rigorous than we are in the business world. Because when you look at the way that AWS has implemented their causal framework, it would get torn to pieces in an academic setting. But for that engineer who's got to figure out what went wrong, it is a perfectly legitimate approach because it's mostly right. That's all they need. They'll figure it out from there. And so, the types of questions you're asking right now are very, very rigorous. And you will end up backing off from that level of rigor because the business doesn't need it. The business needs are actually a lower threshold of certainty. And so that would be the piece that I would say with causal. You're asking questions that will get, complete disagreement across 3 different spectrums, 2 of them in causal research, 1 of them in the AI version of causal, trying to integrate machine learning and do causal discovery and those sorts of methodologies. And so when you ask those questions, be ready. You'll get 3 different responses, and they'll all be very hard to differentiate between who's right and who's wrong. And in the end, the methodology is very important, but that level of certainty isn't so much important.
Thank you. That's very interesting to hear. And this is, I think, where the exercise is going to be, how to back off the rigor enough to make it into industry and make sense of what I need to do.
Yeah, I think the important thing is you're not trying to gain marks on an exam and up the marks on an exam, right? You're trying to, make some more money. And it's interesting because sometimes you need to get the C-level grade to maximize returns. I'm trying to make an analogy. It's probably not a good one. But anyways, Keith, go for it.
And I couldn't agree more with what you were just talking about. And particularly the way that you brought up Pearl. Here's a guy who won the Turing Award on the computer science side, but basically has spent 30 years fighting with academics that causality really is like a thing, right? So I mean, I couldn't have said it better. And the whole PyY thing is super interesting. One quick comment for folks that maybe have never really thought about this stuff and just want a kind of like an easy entry point. It's not causality exactly, but on Google Analytics, they have this section in their help file on why they do A/B testing with Bayesian instead of A/B testing with p-values. And it's only a couple of pages. It's absolutely brilliant. And I think anybody who's into data could follow that logic. And it really is an example of what Vin was just talking about, because there will literally be questions in the help file. Where are my p-values? I can't proceed without p-values. I'm freaking out. Where are my p-values? And it's addressed right in the help file. The reason we don't provide p-values is because we're doing this Bayesian. The reason we've decided to do Bayesian is because it's actually answering what your real question is, which is my B better than my A used to be, right? But again, they walk through it very clearly. It can be an entry level discussion, I think, for those of you that are intrigued but just haven't gone down this rabbit hole before.
Keith, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm excited to find some time to go through that course, and we'll talk about this in a podcast episode for sure. It might be fun to do maybe Vin and Keith together, with me asking stupid questions, because I feel like the audience can gain a lot from my stupidity. By the way, I don't know if I shouted it out already or not, but I did a episode on my podcast with Dana McKenzie, who's the co-author of the Book of Why. So definitely check out that episode. It's linked right there in the chat. I think I just called it like the Book of Why. So definitely check that out. Dana did offer that to introduce me to Judea Pearl, but I was like, I think I passed up on that. I might have to hit him up and see if that offer is still valid after this conversation with.
No, I got to tell you, I've heard a couple of his podcasts. He's an amazing guest, and he is not as scary as you think to interview. Yeah. He's a great guest.
Yeah, I've heard the episode with him and Lex Friedman. I was like, that was such a good episode. Yeah, speaking of Lex Friedman, did you know Lex Friedman and I have interviewed two of the same guests, John Vervaeke and Jordan Ellenberg. So go listen to those episodes side by side, me versus him. Let me know who you think the better podcaster is. Pretty sure it is me. Keith, any final statements or anything here?
Well, I was thinking you should invite Lex.
Yeah, I've tried multiple times. Actually, Lex Friedman put out a call for like it was just like a looking for people to work on his podcast, and so I applied. He said he was looking for research assistants for the podcast, and I was like, all right, well, I researched the shit out of my guests. Like, I'm amazing at that, and I know how podcasts work and a little bit about them. So we'll see if he'll get back to me. One of the things he asked was how much you want per hour, and I put like an absurd number for a virtual assistant that does research, but we'll see what happens. But he had this question, and the question was, do you work hard or do you work smart? And then the follow-up question was, explain your answer to the previous question. And so my answer was, I work hard. And why? Because I'm too dumb to work smart. So I have to work hard. So that was response there. Let's see if he buys that. Any other questions coming in? Do let me know. Don't say anything on YouTube. Scott Taylor, by the way, was in the YouTube chatting it up. Scott Taylor, did not forget about you. Hopefully you're doing good, man. It was good hanging out. I hung out with was it earlier this week? Might have been last week. I don't know, man. Weeks just be running together nowadays. But I was hanging out on a call with Scott Taylor, Kate, Christina, Ravit, Tom, a bunch of other people. It was a great time. Kosa, your hands up. Go for it, my friend.
Yeah, just quickly on the work hard, work smart, I'm too dumb to work smart thing. The fact that you're too dumb to work smart is proof that you're smart enough to realize where you can work smarter, right? The fact is, like, I'm in a similar boat where I work hard because I'm not the smartest bloke in the room, and I like not being the smartest bloke in the room. If I am, that's the wrong room. But the fact of the matter is, there's a limit to how much effort overcomes things, right? Because you got to balance effort with balance, right, and everything else. So yeah, work hard, but don't burn yourself out.
And Makiko, let's hear from you on this, because you put there in the chat same. So talk to us about working hard versus working smart. Go for it.
This is going to sound so bad and vaguely hypocritical, but I'm a little bit over hustle culture. So I'm investing in the things that bring me joy, and that is, my meal service, my quilting table, and fabrics, knitting, and doing content. So yeah. It was funny though, because it's funny because since I'm starting the new chapter of my career, right? I was looking back at all the different twists and turns that my career has taken. And I remember in high school, most of my teachers were I was going to be too dumb to accomplish anything. I had a few high school teachers. Most of my high school teachers loved me, but there were ones who were I don't know. I don't know what the deal is. They were so intent on trying to break the spirit of a high school student, and it's so sad that some teachers are like that. But I think also to adaptability. It's something that you and I, Harpreet, have talked about, right? About playing the long game of building a career and a body of work, as opposed to playing the short game of like, sometimes it's like the short game is trying to get as much money as possible, trying to get as many clients as possible, trying to get as many projects as possible. But the longer game is building the body of work, building the quality relationships, building the quality community, like marketing yourself at the price you feel you deserve for the value that you bring. And the right people will like recognize that, and they will come and like be a part of your tribe. So yeah. I mean, I totally get that whole like you have to work hard at a certain point, but I'm also a little bit done over the hustle culture of Silicon Valley. So now I want to like work happy.
No, I feel you on that 100%. By the way, Makiko has made a career switch into developer relations. One by one, I will be converting everyone you see here to developer relations because that is what I do. I convert people to my side. But dude, yeah, man, like probably the first time ever, I feel like everything is just lined up. Like everything's lined up, right? Like the stuff I was doing for fun on the side is now my actual full-time job. Like this is what I do for a living, and it is amazing. Like I spend half my week learning computer vision with no stress. Like I don't got to worry about people asking me like, why the fuck you spend time on computer vision? We need to get this done for this business value and that report and all this, that, and the other. Nobody fucking cares. They're like, yeah, spend like 2 days a week learning computer vision. Do it. And then I host events, I write content, I, strategize community, I bring people together. Like I'm doing everything that I enjoy doing. The stuff that I would do in my spare time. It's just not my full-time job. Yeah, everything's just like lined up, and it's amazing, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, it's
I
weird.
gotta say, man, that's
Yeah.
I love hearing that you're doing exactly what you love doing, and
Yeah.
that's huge, right? Because one thing that I've learned in the last few years is it's not just doing what you love doing and the job that you think you love. Because I mean, I've kind of broken at multiple points in the last 7 or 8 years. I've broken down hey, this is the job that I'm meant to do. This is the job that I love. Breaking through those preconceived notions of, oh, I need to go do a PhD from MIT, from a top tier, tech school, to, breaking through all of those barriers of saying these are preconceived notions and not necessarily in line with my true nature, right? So getting into those jobs where you're doing that, that's powerful, man. And I love hearing that that's the space you're in right now. And the other half is the DevRel in general. The fact that we have a formalized role for something like this within the ecosystem of tech just shows that maturity of we're bringing forward the human element of tech development, which for the largest part in the last 40, 50 years has just not been around. So really good to hear it, mate.
Yeah, and to that point about just this, like you're talking about, oh, I've got to do this, I'm supposed to do this, supposed to do that, and the other. Like, I feel like a lot, like, people like online do this too. Like Justin Welsh, for example, like posting a picture of his calendar with no meetings, no appointments, saying, oh, goals. Like, all right, cool, man. Like, so what, you're making your money teaching people how to make their money online so that they can then teach other people how to make, like, I don't want any part of that anymore. Like I thought I wanted to be a part of that or do something close to that just because everyone says I should be doing that. That's what I should be doing. But really, like, that is not what freedom really is. I think I posted about this the other day, right? And I said, freedom isn't having, an empty calendar and just complete idleness. That's not what freedom is, man. It's having the time and space to think about and work about the problems that you actually want to solve. Like, these are things that I want to be doing, and I'm getting paid for it. Like, yeah, dude, like, I made it in life, right?
That was the thing that to me was like really surprising when I transitioned into data science and then hopped my way over to like engineering. Was I thought I would be doing a lot more learning, building, and sharing. And it ended up not being that. A lot of times it ended up being like fighting with legacy code, sometimes fighting with legacy culture, and a lot of times like spinning the wheel on just really kind of minute things, like I don't know, like how initiatives are named or whatever. And I ended up taking on more of like because like in my head, like DevRel is basically like you are helping like developers or folks or data scientists use your tools, and you're helping to make the tool, like the product or service, like better, and you're trying to make people's lives better. And I kind of sort of thought that was what engineering was, but especially like platform engineering, but I realized maybe that was a little bit of a naive notion. That might be like the aspirational intent, but I also think too, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just it was weird, you know. It's weird that like I had to kind of switch to like a non-engineering title to finally do the work I thought I was going to be doing like as an engineer. So
Yeah. I mean, there's still a dark side, DevRel. We're still gonna have to deal with the same kind of stuff from executives and people like that. But it's just so much more fun. The work itself is it brings me so much joy. It's so fun. Keith, you got anything to add here? I'd love to hear from you.
Well, the only I keep on thinking about something Makiko said a couple of minutes ago about the whole high school teacher thing. I'm curious how many of us had at least one high school teacher that thought we wouldn't amount to anything. For me, it's kind of like a badge of honor. I kind of get inspired by that kind of thing.
All of them, all of my high school teachers. That I was in nothing but honors classes in high school, but I was like the bottom 2% because I kept skipping school to like go do drugs. But I'd show up and I'd take the exam and do decent on the exam. But there's one teacher in particular. He was my chemistry teacher, AP chemistry teacher. I think this was 10th grade, 9th grade, maybe 9th or 10th grade. And I was an active student participating in class, like, asking questions, like, just asking questions that I was just curious about. And he just went off the rails on me one day. He was like, you sitting here acting like you know all these things or like that you're smart, but you know what? Wait till you see your next exam, the score you got. I'm just sitting there like, what the fuck is blowing up on me, man? But he genuinely killed my love of science for a very long time. It was horrible. But Costa, let's hear from you.
I mean, teaching is hard, man. Teaching is a tough gig. I just want us to like step back and appreciate that for a second, right?
Yeah.
Like having taught at a university and having tutored a bunch of different students who all learn differently, for like high school students. It is a tough gig, and whatever else we may say, we may rip on them now because we're like, hey, heads on a pole, every teacher that told me I wouldn't amount to shit, right? Just step back and appreciate, right? Like, it's a tough gig, and dealing with students that just think differently, that just approach things differently. The people on this podcast, let's be honest, guys, and this isn't that we think better or worse, it's just that we think differently, right? People who have that love for data, who have that love for, we have an inherent love for chaos, for organizing chaos, and for looking into this abyss of things that don't make sense and trying to make sense of it. Whereas a lot of other people prefer structure and prefer, okay, this is an organized way of working and we follow those those rules and protocols that's already established. A lot of us love to dive in and fix the mess. I mean, sure, Mikiko, you might, I mean, I don't know what your take is on it from the MLOps standpoint. It feels a lot more solid and probably a lot less chaotic than some of the experimental work out there. But in reality, it's fully chaotic, and you're just trying to, you're exactly, like I can see you shaking your head. You're digging your hands into this mud that everyone says is, oh, that's just engineering, right? And you're like, no, this is mud, and we're trying to build structures with mud here. We're trying to build brick houses with mud. So there's this love for chaos, right? And the point I'm trying to make is all of us here, I think we can establish that we have this inherent love for chaos, and teachers struggle to deal with that because it's so hard to teach a class of 30 kids as one person who's had barely any support, barely any mentoring. We expect young teachers straight out of universities to teach at this extremely high level, and they're getting paid jack shit. Let's be frank, right? They're getting paid, barely anything compared to what they should be getting paid. And fundamentally, right, what I found was two kinds of responses for most teachers. One that would essentially turn around and say, hey, you're smart, but you're lazy, just do the work, right? The others that would just be like, yeah, he's lazy, he's not very good at this, he's just going to drop the ball, so I'm not going to bother, right? Let him drag his feet along through the class. And the latter killed my love for science. I ended up hating biology and chemistry. The only thing that kept me going was like electronics, and I was always kind of obsessed with robots, and aircraft. So I kind of loved that side anyway. So that love kind of overcame the boredom of science, right? But on the flip side, you have those teachers that I can remember maybe 3 or 4 teachers that they chose to, throw their hands into the mud and try to figure out, how do we teach this chaotic kid, right? And they all had different approaches, and it was fantastic. I was good at English, but I hated English, like lit. And I had one teacher that realized, hey, this guy doesn't care about literature techniques. He cares about philosophy, right? So he managed to tailor every single lesson in the 11th grade and the 12th grade into a tweak of, like, he'd talk about the structure of the lesson that he's supposed to teach, and then he'd dive into like Jungian psychology or something like that, just to throw in enough there for the 2 or 3 of us that was super chaotic in the class and wanted that additional input. And then you had like people that would just challenge you. I didn't like being told, hey, I still don't, hey, this is the thing we do, this is how we do it, just follow the protocol. I'm a high ID personality. If you've ever done disk analysis, right, I'm a high ID personality, right? So very, very low compliance, like 8 out of 100 kind of thing, right? You don't want me as your QC engineer. Fact is, we had teachers that would challenge us in those ways. There was one teacher that literally, he would limit me to 3 questions per lesson, right? We all know that I can talk for days, like I'm doing right now. But it was like, limit to 3 questions per day, right? And that made me have to think hard for, hey, what am I going to ask him? What can I answer for myself with the knowledge that I already have, while still keeping up with the conversation? Because a lot of the time when I'm asking him a question, it's not exactly about this. It's because he's given me a seed of information that I've gone off to think about something else. It gives me that habit of writing that down and exploring that separately and coming back to that. Teaching me was tough, right? And then I liked that competitive nature of it. I'm a little bit competitive at times. He did this thing, and I'm not going to name names on which subject because everyone figured that out. But he did this thing where there were only like 8 or 9 of us in the class. He'd basically write down, and we were all competitive. Like, we were all that kind of competitive nature, and we enjoyed it, which is why it was okay to do. But in a lot of classes, maybe not, right? He put, after every exam or assignment or assessment, he'd basically he'd put all the scores in the class, right, on the whiteboard. He just put the scores down, but not our names, right? Starting at the top, going right down to the bottom, right? And then he would ask each of us to come up and put our initials next to the score we thought we got, right? And it's brutal because everyone in the class knows what you think you got and what you actually got. But it's a great way to teach us to recalibrate our thinking of, where am I actually from an understanding perspective. And that was something that was so invaluable to me as a competitive person, as a person who needs to battle ego and humility all the time. One of the best lessons I've ever had. And he understood that particular class of thinkers operate in that way and enjoy having that feedback to them. Those are some of the best teachers I had, were the ones that dug their hands into it. And it's very hard to find it. So you got to appreciate, right? Yeah, sure. Heads on a poll. There's a lot of teachers that said I wouldn't amount to anything. But hey, all you need is those 2 or 3 that push you through, right? So
yeah, dude, I was actually a high school teacher for 2 years. This was,
and you'd be a great high school teacher.
Yeah, I taught math, and like I kind of just did it because, like, for whatever reason I had no other options. So I became a teacher, and so I was a teacher for 2 years. But I was teaching at this in California. We have something called academic recovery, and there's this kind of a segment of schools or that's called Options for Youth, Opportunities for Learning, Options for Youth, whatever. There was one of those. They're both one company, and I taught there for 2 years at Options for Youth, teaching the kids that were kicked out of high school, just fresh out of juvie, or for whatever reason were on academic recovery. And at the same time, though, in the same school, and by school, the schools were interesting. It was just, you imagine a strip mall and like just a little like place inside the strip mall. This is what the school was. This is where I show up to work to teach kids math. But yeah, in my same class, I have kids that were trying to catch up, but then kids that were on the other end of the spectrum that are trying to get ahead, get faster, because those are your options. Like, let's say you wanted to finish high school quick, you got opportunities for learning, options for youth, and you just take your units. Everything was unit based. You have a packet, you do your questions, you turn it in, you get your credit. A very interesting model. But yeah, dude, I was dealing with kids that are just like me, man. Like, most Indian people you see in data science come from very cushy and plush backgrounds, and they're all good kids, and they all lived in nice neighborhoods with rich parents. That was not me. I grew up broke as fuck in the hood, and dealt with struggles that a kid would deal with in that environment, and I could just relate to them. I think that's what made me a good teacher. I don't know if I was a good teacher or not, but that's what made me an impactful teacher, being able to help kids. I just understood them. I got them because I was them. But because of that teaching, because of doing that little bit of math, I was teaching high school level math, and that's when I was like, holy shit, dude, I'm actually like pretty good at this, and I really enjoy it. And so that's when I decided to go back to grad school and study math, in graduate school, and pursue a career in actuarial sciences. And wouldn't have had that if I didn't take a pit stop teaching math. Great discussion, y'all. Man, I don't see any questions coming on LinkedIn. Don't see any questions coming on YouTube. I think it's a good time to wrap it up, man. As usual, good discussion. I'm excited that y'all were here. Good to see a lot of old friends, a lot of new faces. Hope you new faces swing by. Those of you watching on LinkedIn, we had some good views on LinkedIn. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Do let me know. Smash that like. Let me know what's going on. I don't got any announcements on anything, man. Just have a good weekend. Chill out. Enjoy. See y'all next time. Russell's got some good comments here as well. Russell's saying empathy is one of the strongest skills to be able to connect with people. Russell's saying that where I was challenging as a child was also often using the ITTT mapping. Well, talk to me about that real quick, Russell. I haven't heard from you at all, man. So let's hear from Russell, then we'll wrap it up. In the meantime, I'll keep an eye out for questions and comments in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Harpreet. Yeah, so ITTT, if this then that, a lot of people in the data community will be familiar with that philosophy. And as a child, I was fascinated to learn anything that I could learn. I had a great appetite for learning. So if a teacher presented something that was really interesting, I would normally go to them with additional questions. So that's very interesting. If that means that, then by association, does something else that's connected to it mean this? Then I'd want to explore the further boundaries of the very fixed lessons that was on the lesson plans that they had, usually to the frustration of the teachers. And ultimately, that did result in me being asked to sit in the corner to stop bothering the teachers. Some teachers, as you mentioned, you get good teachers. Some teachers were very good and tolerated me very well, and I responded quite well in those. But in others, they got used to me, and I used to be asked to sit in the corner quite a lot in some of those. So yes, I think it depends very much in the institutions and facilities you achieve your education as to your feelings about those, and how they can optimize your ability for learning. So I don't think I optimized my ability as a young child. I think I could have learned more faster, but I'm sure that happens to many, many people. So I don't class myself as unique in that respect.
Russell, thank you so much. Thank y'all for hanging out. Let's go ahead and wrap it up. It's been a good evening with y'all, or morning, depending on what side of the world you're at, or late in the evening, night. Thank you all for being here. Remember, my friends, you got one life on this planet. Why not try to do something big? Cheers, everyone.